On March 22nd, 2024, Peerless Trout First Nation members will be voting on whether to adopt the Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code. The Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code will allow on-reserve land governance authority to be transferred from the Minister of Indian Affairs to Peerless Trout First Nation, and will benefit our lands and members as we will be able to better protect our environment, cultural, and historic sites. By having greater autonomy, our nation can better respond to economic opportunities and allow our communities to grow in a responsible and sustainable way that will ensure that our reserve lands are kept for future generations. If approved, 44 outdated land management related sections of the Indian Act will no longer apply to Peerless Trout First Nation reserves, and the Land and Natural Resource Management Authority currently held by the Minister will be transferred to Peerless Trout First Nation to be governed under the PTFN Land Code.
Natural Resources Management Authority that will transfer from Section 93 of the Indian Act to Peerless Trout First Nations Land Code. Section 31.1 A and B, subject to community consultation, include A. Interest and licenses of Peerless Trout First Nation land, including member allocations, leases, permits, easements and right-of-ways, and B. Licenses to take natural resources from Peerless Trout First Nation land, including cutting timber or removing minerals, stone, sand, gravel, clay, soil, or other substances. It is important to know that Peerless Trout First Nation will not completely exit the Indian Act. The wide-ranging bylaw powers of the Council found in Section 81 and 85.1 of the Indian Act will continue to be available should the Council wish to enact them on Peerless Trout First Nation reserve. For the most part, these are non-land related matters. For example, the powers of the Council relating to Section 81 gives Council power to regulate A. Health, B. Traffic, C. Observance of law and order, D. Protection against trespassing and domestic animal bylaws.
Other Section 81 powers include construction and maintenance of roads, bridges, and other public works, preservation, protection, and management of fur-bearing animals on reserve.
And Section 85 of the Indian Act grants Council power to regulate, control, or prohibition of intoxicant substances.
It's important to know that the fiduciary relationship between Canada and Peerless Trout First Nation and its members will not be changed under Land Code. The Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code will not change elections, Peerless Trout First Nation membership, treaty status, health funding, CFS laws, treaty annuity, the Tribal Council, future land claims, and operational funding such as education, housing, public works, social development and training, and our eligibility for provincial or federal funding grant programs. Under Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code, PTFN reserve land can never be sold or surrendered or expropriated for any provincial purpose. Under Land Code, Section 29 of the Indian Act will remain in force, which states reserve lands are not subject to seizure under the legal process. This is made clear under Section 36.1 of the Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code. This will ensure that our reserve lands are protected for future generations. The Land Code will enact 3 articles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Article 26 says in part, Indigenous people have the right to own, use, develop, and control the lands, territories, and resources that they possess by reason of traditional ownership or other traditional occupation or use, as well as those in which they have otherwise acquired. Article 29 says in part, Indigenous peoples have the right to the conservation and protection of the environment and the productive capacity of their lands. States shall establish and implement assistance programs for Indigenous peoples for such conservation and protection without discrimination. Article 32 says, in part, Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. The Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code will not impact any treaty and Aboriginal rights within the traditional territory. Our people will continue to have the right to hunt, fish, trap, harvest, and gather within the traditional territory, and the Crown's duty to consult and accommodate when contemplating projects within our territory that may impact the treaty and Aboriginal rights of our members will remain. Leave the old and restrictive land rules of the Indian Act behind and bring the modern, up-to-date land governance system to your reserve lands, and vote yes to the Peerless Trout First Nation Land Code.